foreign predatory parasitic corporations are replacing our natural environment with an industrial landscape of wind turbines. One Nation will stand against sending children down a path of drug dependency and body mutilation to appease the gender cult. Leave our kids alone. The Trusted Digital Identity Bill is a global surveillance and control mechanism that profit-hungry corporations and power-mad politicians drafted and crafted. One Nation opposes this inhuman, dystopian future that the United Nations promotes as the Great Reset, and we condemn this Parliament for signing on to it. I called for Australia to reject the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and instead mount a great resist. Just like the koalas being euthanized to make way for wind turbines or damaged solar panels leaking toxic heavy metals into waterways, the United Nations net zero plan again involves killing the environment to save it. I've been speaking about the fear, the oppression and the inhuman cruelty of our COVID response since July 2020. I promised to hound down those responsible, and I will continue relentlessly to keep that promise. You're about to be live with me, Senator Malcolm Roberts. Well, g'day and welcome. This is Senator Malcolm Roberts for the weekly wrap. It's about time we got back into it again. It's been a couple of weeks since the election, and I'll give you a wrap up on the election pretty soon. I've just got to share with you something personal though. I did dancing lessons last night, and for the first time, my wife has tried many times to have dancing lessons with me. For the first time, I didn't feel like my feet were getting tangled. Must be the clear thinking after the election. I just remind people, we used to run podcasts. We'll be starting them up again soon. We've got some very interesting guests. And the aims of my podcast are to restore our country and our planet for humans to abound and thrive. Why the planet? Because Australia is part of the planet. Now, I'm not talking about joining the UN. I'm not talking about bringing in globalist ideas. Far from that, the reverse. Because the UN is destroying the planet. What we want to do is, by being responsible citizens, productive citizens, free citizens, we want to save the planet. I'll talk more about my very pro-human attitude later. I've got a very pro-human stance. I'm going to continue with the core issues because I've been stunned with just how deeply entrenched this Labor government is and the coalition. No, I don't think the election was fraud. I'll get on to the comments later. We'll continue with the core issues. I've been stunned. I've had conversations with homeless people in the last couple of weeks since the election, and it's just frightening what's going on. And it's a really simple solution. Immigration, housing, energy, culture, tax, all getting wrecked in this country. Look, let's start with a couple of thank yous. I want to thank those who've remained loyal with us for over 28 years. People who stay faithful after all we've been subjected to and bashed, and Pauline going through jail, Pauline being called all kinds of names, Pauline being lied about, myself being lied about. So thank you so much for being so faithful. We've increased our vote despite all the nasty stuff that came out of the pop-up parties and the micro parties. So we have grown our vote in the last election, and we continue growing. We've shown that we're capable of being around for 28 years and still growing, and now people are swinging more and more towards us. I want to thank the One Nation candidates, the One Nation volunteers who distributed how to vote cards at pre-polls and at polling, the door knocking, the scrutineers. I'm very proud to have worked with you, extremely proud. The people we have as volunteers are second to none. They really shine at polling booths, and I really mean that because they've been so fantastic. They're very genuine, down-to-earth people. I want to thank One Nation headquarters for the way they organised this election. They had very little time. Good, says Ian King. Thanks, mate. One Nation headquarters have done a marvellous job. They've been very lean team there in terms of numbers, and they had to deal with the Queensland election and the wrap-up of the Queensland election as late as November, just a few months to get stuck into the federal election, and they've done a marvellous job. Candidates in all 151 seats in the lower house, all Senate seats, except, and we're proud of this, except for Canberra. There are not many people in Canberra who like One Nation. We don't like many of the bureaucrats either. Look, I want to single out my Senate office team. I'm not going to mention them by name because there's a bit of a convention not doing so. But I tend to introduce them in public forums, etc., but I won't do it on the net. And there's no order in which I'm identifying these people or naming these positions. But our office manager, she worked her guts out. She went way beyond the call of duty. She's just fantastic. Not only competent, but totally truthful, totally honest, very, very hardworking. And I can say the same about every person in my team. Senior parliamentary advisor who led the way in putting together One Nation's policies, which are the most comprehensive and enlightened policies this country has ever seen from any party. I want to thank our parliamentary advisor for the work he did, travelled with me, put up with me, helped me out, organised things in advance, but just a pleasure to be with and a pleasure to work with. All of the electorate officers been fantastic. All the volunteers, including the volunteers who've come into the office over the years and have worked in here. What I want to say is not so much that each of them are fantastic, and they are, but I wouldn't shine if it wasn't for the team. It is a team effort in this place. I have a little story that I tell each person when we interview them for a job. I want them to behave in a way that if someone walks in on a team meeting we're having, they wonder who the senator is. There's no one person in charge, that they work together, they're free to speak up, because I would rather be told I'm about to screw up than just be told I've just screwed up. So the team makes me look really good. So thank you so much for the team, and thank you so much for the extraordinary hours, the extraordinary effort you went to, and always telling the truth. They will never, ever lie. So thank you so much. So the election update. One Nation had a very strong showing. We increased our national and Queensland support at percentage of votes, almost 7% in nationally. We had a comprehensive policy platform, that's what did it. We had candidates and volunteers who were second to none, and you made a difference, a real difference. We had so many fine candidates, One Nation candidates, and they lifted the One Nation votes in their seats. I want to single out a couple in particular. I don't know that it's fair to single them out, actually, but Stuart Bonds got to be two-party preferred, so he was the second last to get knocked out. So Labor Party candidate and Hunter won. Stuart came second. He had the two-party preferred vote. Natalie Davis worked very, very hard and very, very intelligently and pushed us to do more. And she questioned things about us and in terms of ideas and the way we thought. And that's so much appreciated, Natalie, that people standing up. I want to thank Natalie for her ground campaign and so many candidates for their ground campaign. Now, what's the result so far? Well, we're still counting in the Senate. So the experts, gee, that's a bit of a worry, isn't it? The experts, people who know in my staff are saying it's highly likely that I'll be returned. But it won't be known for sure until the preferences are distributed. Highly likely, but not yet definite. So we're confident that I'll be getting back in. You will know more in about 2 weeks. I also want to thank did you win your seat? Mandy says, yeah, I just mentioned that, Mandy. Highly likely, but not yet definite. Depends on preferences. The last two positions in Queensland are still up for grabs. The Australian Electoral Commission did a fabulous job. Of course, there's no perfect job that the Australian Electoral Commission can do, but I'll be very, very confident. We put them through the ringers in the last 6 years, and they've answered our questions eventually, and they have changed things in light of what we've exposed. But they're doing a pretty good job. But we'll be holding them accountable in Senate estimates, assuming I get back in. Last people I want to thank. Everyone who voted. Thank you for taking part in democracy. That's the only way to maintain our democracy, is to take part. You know, I'll share a story. I was at the polling booth in Flagstone, which is in the right electorate, with Natalie Davis. And a lady came up to me and she was very keen and complimentary about my work, and she said, you know, she indicated that she'd be voting that way. So she came out and she said, sorry, mate, I just couldn't vote for you. I said, why not? She said, well, I had to write a letter, use the ballot paper to write a letter saying that I couldn't vote. Because, you know, Malcolm, if 51% of the people, 51% of the voters say they're not going to vote, then they have to redo everything and rejig the Constitution and all the rest of it. No, I went, you just gave the Liberal Party and the Labor Party a leg up by not voting. I mean, this is the kind of stupidity and ignorance that is bedeviling Australia. People who think everything on the internet is correct and wrong. and correct and right. How are we going in other states? Senate, we're still in the contest in WA with Tyrone Whitten, Warren Pickering in Victoria, Warwick Stacey in New South Wales, and possibly Lee Hansen in Tasmania. And all of those will be fantastic. Jennifer Game looks as though she won't get up in South Australia. And she's got a brain the size of a planet. She is phenomenal to work with. She used to be in Pauline's office. And she is just a wonderful, wonderful woman to work with. I was really hoping Jennifer would get in. But this shows that our candidates we're the only small party capable of getting senators elected. The only small party capable of getting senators elected. So we could end up with another 4 plus 2, that's 6. Or we could end up with just the two of us, Pauline and me. Thank you, Dylan, and thank you for your support during the campaign, mate. And thank you for standing up during COVID for the last 5 years. You have not missed a beat. So Tyrone Whitten, WA, Warren Pickering, Victoria, Warwick Stacey, New South Wales, Lee Hansen, Tassie. I'd love to be able to welcome you in a couple of weeks, assuming I get back as well. Election feedback, we'll do a full review after the count is completed, which will be in a few weeks' time. We'll have a party review as well as an office review. Yes, Hammer, those who did not vote, let the minority win. Fools, rigged or not. No vote, no impact. Exactly, no impact. How does a blank vote give? Well, it means that they haven't got less opposition to Liberal and Labor, so you're basically endorsing them to go ahead. That's how they do it. The micro parties had plenty of shots at us. The micro pop-up parties had plenty of shots at us, but it hasn't taken too much bark off us. In fact, our vote has grown. So as I said, we'll do a full review. The LNP is in a mess nationally. We can see that, and I'll talk more about that when I get onto energy. But think about this. The Labor government went from just under 33% of the vote in the last election to now having 34.6% of the vote. So it's dramatically increased the number of seats with just a 1.5% swing. 34.6% of voters. Only 83% of Australians voted. That means they got less than 28.7%. They got 28.7% of the eligible vote. The Labor Party is in government with 28.7% of the eligible vote. That's how people who don't vote help the Labor Party, help the LNP. The LNP got something like 34% of the vote last election, even though they're in opposition. This time they got 31.9%. I think they fell about 3.8%. 31.9% vote with 83% voter turnout. That means 26.5% of eligible voters. Barely a quarter to the LNP. 40 years ago, 95% of people voted Liberal Labor. Their primary vote, in other words, Liberal and Labor, was about 95%. Now it's 66% and falling. Every election it's fallen. It's on a curve downwards. People are waking up. And I'm very, very proud to say that One Nation has been a vital part of that waking up in the last 28 years. So well done, Pauline, for stimulating people, putting out an alternative. That's why it's so important to have One Nation. We will keep pressing on, Shirley. Thank you very much. Look, let's talk about some positive news as well before I start talking about the topics that are really hurting our country. I want to compliment David Crucifuli's LNP government in Queensland. You know, when he was opposition leader, I criticised his work as opposition leader. He was, in my opinion, he was a shadow. He was a vapour. He was a cloud. There was nothing to him, no substance to him. So far, though, his government has been responsible. Apart from the vote, apart from the edict that they can't talk about, the members of Parliament cannot talk about abortion, which is cruel, callous, silencing, censorship of the party who've been elected, of the party members who've been elected to represent the people of Queensland. So that was terrible. But you've stood up against pumped hydro. You stood up and cancelled some projects on solar and wind and put some on hold. Wonderful. David Janetsky, I think, is the man who's the minister responsible, and also David Crucifulli would have backed him up. Wonderful decisions. You're showing that coal has an extended life in this state. We've got the best fleet of coal-fired power stations in the country, and we need to keep them going. We're not going to shut them early. And you've also done a ban or a review, I think, of transgender gender attempts to change gender. Of course, you can't change gender, but you've put that on under review now to see what's going on in this state. And I'll talk more about that later. Housing. What a disgrace. Potentially the richest country in the world, the richest country in the world per capita in terms of resources. And we've got people in what is the richest state in the country, what should be the richest state in the country, sleeping under bridges, in cars, in tents, in caravans, in parks, going home, working families, mums and dads going home in the evenings to find out if their kids are still in the car where they'll sleep that night. Where do they toilet? Where do they shower? This is what's going on in our country. And I'm going to keep bashing this issue because these are lives at stake, as people would understand who have been to the homeless in their camps, because they're very, very vulnerable to all kinds of threats and crimes. My social media post early this morning took off. All I did was post Daniel Cinzio's text that he got from another volunteer up in the north side of Brisbane. They're just stunned with what's going on. The incompetence, the dishonesty of state and federal governments when it comes to housing. The local councils caught in a vice because they've got to move people on, or they choose to move people on. Some mayors stop and refuse to move people on because there's nowhere else for these people to go. Other mayors put the bulldozers, the excavators through the tents, just destroy their people's homes. This is where the homes are. They're just destroying these things. Where do people go? They don't seem to care. You know, I'm going to put up another post this afternoon. I've already put it up on X. A Sunny Coast person texted me. I'll tell you what they said. This person, I won't mention their gender, this person said that they saw my post of Daniel Cinzio. And Daniel, I must compliment Daniel because he is doing fabulous work. He's got together a network of volunteers, a network of suppliers, food suppliers, provision suppliers, camping suppliers, and he goes around the homeless and helps them distribute the material. Anyway, this person on Sunny Coast said, just read your post about immigration, because the immigration is the core problem. Excessive, catastrophic, inhuman immigration numbers, record numbers, double the previous record numbers, are what's responsible for this tragic, catastrophic housing problem. This person said, it's a very sad state of affairs. Once upon a time, we had one homeless person here on the Sunny Coast living in the beach dunes. Now we have loads of homeless in dunes, which are meant to be protected and prohibited spaces under state law, as dunes and vegetation are vital for keeping dunes strong and healthy, to act as our first line of defence against the ocean, and also for the turtles to lay in and wildlife to flourish. 2 new places have popped up this week in a small stretch I've never seen them in before, complete with their shopping trolleys, blow-up mattress, and left it litter strewn and a mess. Personally, this person says, I don't mind they are in the back dunes if they're not damaging vegetation or the dune, but sadly that's not what we're seeing. They are now in the frontal and back dunes, cutting down tree limbs to make fire or clearance for their bedding. No electricity, they've got to chop down trees. Leave litter everywhere. Some have mental health issues and are aggressive. Council isn't finding them places to stay because there is nowhere safe for them to stay, and no one seems to be helping them with their mental challenges either. And people living homelessly, people who are working and living in tents and cars, they all have mental health issues because they're under so much pressure. A man is there to provide, and when he can't provide a home, the basis for a family, then he feels terrible. Such a huge problem, but one that can be solved if there was a decent supply of affordable housing for residents first, then others. I'll say that again. For Australian residents first, then others. Numerous times a day, you'll see a post that says, we're moving to the Sunny Coast. Every day, you see a post from a local long-term resident saying they're leaving because they can't afford the rent here. And I remember Morgan Cox, who I interviewed when I was on the Gold Coast. He's from Central Coast in New South Wales. He was telling us exactly that. Because they can't afford the rent here, they're leaving the Sunny Coast. It's displacing people. It's alienating them from their families, social circles and home. I truly hope the federal and state governments prioritise this issue. They're not. They're just callously ignoring it. That's why I'm going to keep going on this issue. I truly hope the federal and state government prioritise this issue and help every Aussie to, at the very least, have a roof over their head again. Thank you so much to that person. I won't mention their name or their gender because I don't want to identify them. Every city in Queensland, major city in Queensland, starting from Cairns to Townsville to Mackay to Bowen, Mackay to Rocky to Gladstone to Bundaberg to Maryborough to Gympie, Ipswich, Gold Coast, Sunny Coast, Beaudesert, all have homeless in their towns, every one of them. And they're there because of rampant immigration. Every city in what should be the richest state in the world. It's catastrophic. It's inhuman what's going on. And it's a betrayal of the young people, which are the future of our country. When I was young, it was a goal to have a house, to raise a family, to contribute to society. The young are increasingly telling me they can't do that now. They're accusing our generation and the people in their 50s today, 60s and 70s and 80s, of betraying them. And in Parliament, we have betrayed them. I haven't, but we've stood up for them. But I'm talking about as a group, parliamentarians have betrayed them, which means the voters of Australia have betrayed them. You've just elected another Labor government and a Liberal National Party opposition who are betraying the young and have done that for decades. Look at the Greens. Open borders. That's what they want. They've been pushing open borders, and that's part of the pressure for Labor. Yes, Ron, mass immigration has destroyed us. The Greens push open borders. They push to stop the timber industry. How do you build bloody houses? They push UN policies and regulations that are raising energy prices through the roof. Along with Labor, along with the LNP, they push for letting anyone into the country, open borders, unsuitable entrance. They put other nations first. So they're destroying our immigration system, flooding the joint with people who shouldn't be here. And then they turn around and they say they've got a housing crisis that they created, a housing crisis that they won't fix because they stopped the timber industry. Then they come up with rent caps as their policy and public housing. Who the hell is going to build public housing? The federal government's shown that it can't build houses. Rent caps are known to drive up prices of rents everywhere they've been tried in the world. They come up with socialist ideas that are destroying us, then they come up with socialist ideas that will entrench the problem. And yet they go and pander to young people to get votes. People have got to wake up. Let's have a look at the graph of civilian population change over time. This is horrific. Look at that. There's the graph. You might not be able to see my cursor, but there's the graph. The green, the civilian population. That's the citizens in our country. The number of citizens. Around about 2007, when Rudd came in, Labor came in, up jumped. The number of people in citizenship jumped. Where the cursor is there, and then Abbott came back in 13. Labor had an election in 2010. And it was almost a tied election, and they got scared and they cut back the number of citizens getting citizenship. And then it's been low ever since. And then look at it's not low, but it's reasonable. And then it plummeted during COVID, which is what you'd expect because the borders were shut, and a lot of people left. And now look at it. Look what Albanese's done since 22. Show the cursor on 22. Look at that. It's skyrocketed. The number of civilians in the country have skyrocketed. So if we go to the net long-term movements, these I'm not so, I won't talk about in detail because we have got to get the breakdown of that, but that's the monthly movements of people in and out of the country. As you can see, it's been a net entry into the country, except during COVID. But look at the right of the graph. It's clearly under Albanese since 2022, it's skyrocketed well above the other years. This is record rampant immigration. I can't give you the breakdowns, but we'll give you some more numbers in a few minutes. But we know for a fact that we have had over 500,000 net immigration a year for the last 2-3 years since Albanese got into power. Over 500,000 people a year. When it came through after his first year that there were more than 500,000 people came into the country, that's net. That's after you take away the people who've left and you just add the people who are entering. The net difference, the net increase in population is over 500,000 a year. When that came in as a score at the end of the first year, he promised to reduce immigration. The second year was higher than the first year. Then he says we're bringing in builders, bringing in construction workers to build houses. Well, that is pure bullshit. 0.6% of his 500,000 a year are builders, construction workers. That means in every 1,000 entries into this country, entries and who stay, 6 are construction workers. They have to build houses for the other 994 in that 1,000. That's what 0.6 looks like. 6 out of 1,000 people who arrive here and settle here are construction workers. They have to build houses for the other 994 people in that 1,000. Let's have a look at Tarek Brooker's graph, graduate visa holders. These are the graduate visa holders in the past decade. 220,000 roughly. Just a bit over 220,000. Look at an increase since 2015. Look at the increase. Look at the increase since 2022. It's shot up. This is what foreign students coming into our country look like. This is after these, are the graduates. The graduates. They're simply hanging around after they've graduated. They're hanging around, requiring houses. What's Labor doing about this? Let's have a look at the number of plus. So we have 670,000 international student visas, plus 220,000 graduates hanging around after they graduate. That's 890,000, heading for a million students plus graduates hanging around. Let's have a look at Tarek Brooker's graph of Australian temporary visa holders. There it is. Look at that. It's gone from 1.25 million, 1.3 million, say, back in 2011. And now it's up around, it's over 2.5 million. 2.5 million temporary visa holders in Australia. That's in addition to the students. Sorry, no, I'm not. I'm wrong on that. It's not in addition. That includes the students. But look at the increase. It's gone from 1.25, it's doubled to 2.5 million temporary visa holders. All of them need a bed. All of them need a roof. Plus, we have 75,000 people here illegally who need to be deported immediately. So I want to commend Tarek Brooker and Matt Barry. I can't remember their X handles, but they're both well worth following on X. Tarek Brooker on housing and immigration, Matt Barry on housing, immigration and politics. I've reached out to them. They both sent me their contact details. I'll be having longer conversation with them. Yeah, as Matt Barry said, thank you, Hammer 5. As Matt Barry said, we don't have a housing issue. We have an immigration issue. So simple that it's beyond government's thinking. Thank you. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Thank you. So well put. The whole basis of this housing crisis is not an inability to build houses. It is an inability to tell the truth on immigration and flooding the joint with migrants. I'm half migrant. Many people in Australia are migrants. The country was built on immigrants. We're not opposed to immigrants. We're opposed to excess immigration. We're opposed to, which is, one immigrant right now is excessive. I'll tell you more about our policy in a minute. It's the same as it was before the election. It'll continue. Excessive immigration is destroying housing in this country in terms of housing welfare. It's causing homelessness. We have got a university foreign students that's basically a Ponzi scheme. Come here, get a job, suppress wages. We saw a story in the mainstream media, the mouthpiece media, the legacy media, the dinosaur media, the globalist media the other day. Even they're admitting it. Half of the students at QIT on international programs have left and not studying. They're not going to class. They're working. Each of them need a bed. Each of them need a roof over their head. It's a Ponzi scheme to get in here and send their money back to the country they came from. And it's not me just saying this. It's not just Pauline saying this. The figures show that 10 to $11 billion a year is sent back home by these students. They're here to work. And it's totally wrong. I'm going to read some items from an excellent article from Tony Abbott. Let me just get it up. Tony Abbott was Prime Minister from 2013 to 2015. And this article that I'm going to quote from in several places is a paper that he had prepared for a Danube Institute talk in Hungary last week. And remember something, it was Tony Abbott who stopped the boats. He was the Prime Minister who stopped the boats. And there's nothing new in what Tony Abbott is saying. It validates what I've been saying and what Pauline has been saying. Let me keep taking material from this. The article is titled, "Immigration is the elephant still crowding the room." Exactly, he nails it. The downside of multiculturalism, so he's getting it here, it is about culture, is the presence of migrants unaccustomed to religious pluralism, minority rights, and a secular state. They're not suitable, some of these people, for our country. Immigration and multiculturalism was the issue that neither side wanted to touch in the election campaign, as Tony Abbott says. Even though it impacted heavily on the cost of living crisis, both sides were pledged to address. Even though it contributed to the wave of anti-Semitism, both sides were pledged to stop. And even though both sides had said they were committed to getting immigration numbers down. Why did both sides not talk about it? I'll tell you why, because they're both guilty. And they can't dig too deeply into the other person because they'll expose themselves. So let's continue with Tony Abbott. But once discussing immigration moves from the need to get it down to the practical steps to cut it, the vested interests it benefits are prone to take offence. The universities, colleges and language schools, whose business model depends on fee-paying overseas students seeking to work and to immigrate, rather than just study and return. The businesses, this is Tony Abbott's list, the businesses that would prefer to import labour rather than train Australians or to pay people more to do menial jobs, the reform-shy officials who've been relying on immigration as the lazy way to generate positive economic growth. That's exactly it. They're covering up a per capita recession. There would be a recession under Chalmers and Albanese if it wasn't for the excessively high immigration that boosts the GDP, sort of. And the moralists who want large numbers of migrants to dilute the Anglo culture they find dull or otherwise dislike, plus a lot of recent immigrants inclined to take personally any critique of high immigration. So we've got these people who've got vested interest in opposing the cutting of migration, but it's doing so much damage. We've got Andrew Bolt speaking about it as well. Let's continue with Tony Abbott. Dealing with all this turned out to be too much for a federal coalition that repeatedly promised to get immigration down further and faster than Labor, but eventually declined to specify how that might be achieved. Exactly what I pointed out during the election campaign. Both parties said, oh, after One Nation raised this as an issue over 3 to 4 years, both parties said, yeah, we see immigration as an issue, we'll cut it. But they didn't give us any numbers, unlike One Nation, which has given hard numbers all the way through. Tony Abbott, if such a sensitive topic is successfully to be addressed, it will require a sustained national debate, which we've been in and we tried to start for 4 years, well prior to the stress of an election campaign and preferably without the accusations of racism that can be so readily derail it. Listen to this figure from Tony. Even for a country of 28 million, if sustained, close to 500,000 newcomers a year is transformative. It's the equivalent of the city the size of Canberra, actually bigger than Canberra, every year entering the country. Every migrant needs something to do, somewhere to live, and a means of getting around. That means downward pressure on wages, upward pressure on housing costs. I'll say that again. Downward pressure on wages, upward pressure on housing costs, and massive pressure on infrastructure. Exactly what Pauline and I have been saying, and the homeless are saying. Immigration at scale certainly adds to the size of the overall economy, but it only adds to individuals' wealth if the newcomers on average are more productive than the locals. That's why I said it It increases gross domestic product, sort of. It doesn't increase productivity. It decreases productivity, which reduces future standard of living and future productivity. Tony Abbott goes on, and even if it does add to wealth, it only adds to social well-being if nearly all the newcomers are keen to fit in, which can't always be taken for granted. Nailed it. We claim to be the world's most successful immigrant nation. Listen to this from Tony Abbott. I actually complimented him. I sent him a text the other day. We claim to be the world's most successful immigrant nation, but can we stay that way based on official bromides such as, quote, our diversity is our unity, end of quote. In other words, he says, that all we have in common is that we don't have anything in common. That is no criteria for an immigration policy, unless you want to destroy the country, Anthony Albanese. Tony Abbott goes on, increasingly this is an issue for every immigrant nation, especially the Anglosphere countries, racked with doubt and guilt about their history, slavery, colonialism, and the dispossession of the original inhabitants. This is what the UN and the World Economic Forum are driving. He goes on, it was the notion of multiculturalism imported from Canada in the 1970s that first encouraged migrants to maintain their language and distinctive characteristics in order supposedly to enliven the Anglo-Celtic mainstream and to make it easier for us to bond with other countries. At its best, it meant migrants becoming Australians in their own way and at their own pace without pressure to conform to Australian values. And given that migrants invariably come because they like what's here, to join us, not change us, the gravitational pull of the Australian way of life has continued to make wonderful Australians of millions of newcomers. Yet, listen to this for culture, yet in sufficient numbers, change us they do, especially now that cheap air travel and the internet enable migrants, should they choose, almost to live in two countries at once. So we are being flooded and our country is being changed right before our eyes. I've heard people from the Indian subcontinent, people from Asia, bemoaning the change of our culture because too many foreigners have come in too quickly. They came here for Australia's culture, and now they don't see it. Let's complete with Tony Abbott. The downside of multiculturalism is the presence of migrants unaccustomed to religious pluralism, minority rights, and a secular state. For a few, death to the infidel mindset is hard to shake, plus a tendency to judge issues in terms of religious solidarity, notwithstanding the Australian citizenship pledge specifying, quote, loyalty to Australia and its people whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey. Some people who are saying death to the infidel will never, never, never agree to that. So Tony Abbott goes on, there wasn't much respect for the Australian values in the angry mob outside the Sydney Opera House 2 days after the October 7 atrocities, shouting, F the Jews, and what sounded very much like gas the Jews, or in local Islamic leaders describing October 7th as a, quote, day of victory. Perhaps there needs to be a longer probationary period before residents can become citizens, and a more exacting citizenship test to weed out people who would prefer merely to live in Hotel Australia than sincerely to join Team Australia. They're turning Team Australia, one of the most team-oriented countries in the world, into Hotel Australia. Well said, Tony Abbott. And One Nation has said that we need 7 to 8 years of probationary period before a resident becomes a citizen. We stand by that. In the end, Australia has to run its migration program much more for the benefit of existing citizens than for potential new ones. Hear, hear. And for the good of society as a whole than for any of its constituent communities. We're perfectly entitled to discriminate on the basis of values. I'll say that again. I agree 100% with Tony Abbott. We are perfectly entitled to discriminate on the basis of values if we're to avoid importing destructive passions. And if we're proud of Australia as it is, as we are entitled to be, we should be wary of immigration that risks making the native-born feel like strangers in their own neighbourhoods. Then he mentions universities. I'm nearly finished with the quotes. Powerful article from Tony Abbott. But even if only to maintain their own standards, universities and colleges should not rely nearly so much on foreign students, something we've been saying for years. Many with little fluency in English. Students with little fluency in English. Businesses should not be permitted to bring in foreign workers without first offering locals more training or higher pay and the so-called skilled migration program, inviting in people on the basis of literally hundreds of literally hundreds of occupations supposedly in demand. He goes on, employment should be the main basis for immigration because working and paying taxes from day one is also the best way to integrate and ultimately to assimilate into the wider Australian community. We've been saying that for years. Last paragraph. Almost nothing engenders more pride in Australia than someone from an obvious migrant background, speaking with a broad Australian accent, succeeding in something that reflects well on our country. But that means migrants who see Australia as a place to be committed to rather than simply to be taken advantage of. Like the members of an extended family, what Australians should all share is mutual solidarity and a determination to work together for the common good. Amen to that. Thank you, Tony Abbott, for a very well-written article. Solid. Thank you so much. That's a summary, pretty much, of One Nation's policy. Now, don't draw any connections between Tony and One Nation from that, but we will applaud anyone from outside a party or inside a party who says something that we strongly endorse, or rather, he's endorsing us. So what's the solution? Well, One Nation policy, I'll repeat that. Sam says, shouldn't the idea be that they get educated here and go back and run their own nation? Yes, that's it. So what's One Nation's policy, the solution? On housing, the core problem is massive immigration. That must be understood. One Nation's policy is working on demand for housing, supply of housing, building prices, loan payments, and inflation. First thing, to reduce demand, stop mass immigration. We will allow only 130,000 people in each year to replace the 220,000 going out. That means 90,000 net decrease in population due to immigration every year until we catch up. Next step, deport 75,000 illegals and drop the Administrative Appeals Tribunal appeals that keep illegals here forever. Reduce foreign students and the Ponzi scheme they are on. Ban foreign ownership of houses. That'll increase the supply of houses. Give them 2 to 3 years to sell up. Many of the houses owned by foreigners are locked up. Give them 2 to 3 years to sell up and get out and sell their house to Australians. Cut the GST on building materials, construction materials. Improve land releases because some people are sitting on land, some developers. Review the National Construction Code because it's cost of compliance with the NDIS that every single person has to comply with building a new house is $49,500, 50 grand a year, 50 grand a house. It might be inclusive. It might be inclusive for disabled people, but what about all the young people that are being excluded because of it? We've got a people's mortgage scheme, 5% 30-year fixed rate, up to 30-year fixed interest rate, 5% per annum. Roll HEX debt into the housing loan. Allow the super account to invest in your house, just like it can invest in any house that you're not associated with. 8-year wait for social services for citizenship. 8-year wait for Medicare, PBS, age pension. And here's something else that's in our immigration policy. The quality of immigration. The type of people who come here. They must comply with our laws, our values, our principles, our culture. They must be capable of fitting in. Every one of the 130,000 we allow in to replace the 220,000 who leave must have a skill. Must have a skill. Be productive straight away. Albanese and Morrison before him let in far too many people here who came here because of the welfare. They're sponges straight away. That does not increase productivity. That does not increase the standard of living. It decreases standard of living. Richard Worrell, the right to vote in this country should be withheld from non-citizens and students, but be available after 5 years of citizenship. That's essentially the case. Only citizens can vote, Richard, which is good. Oh, Lyndon, thank you. Nicole Shires, Lyndon is saying Nicole Shires in Petrie was a delight to talk with. She's a delight to work with, absolutely. Ton of energy. Let's move to energy. Nationals seem lost. The coalition is split. The National Party itself is split. Some people want net zero, some people don't. Let's make it very clear. One Nation does not want net zero. That's part of our policy to end the UN net zero. I feel sorry for Matt Canavan in many ways. He's a wonderfully intelligent person, very well-spoken person. He's fun to be with. He's got a great sense of humour. He's very engaging. He's probably the only person in the Senate that can walk up to anyone in the Senate and put a smile on that other person's face. I know I can't because I'm too outspoken for some of the Greens. They walk the other way sometimes. Actually, some of the Greens are all right. But Matt found himself trapped in the carbon dioxide trap. What's that? That's where when they can't beat you on an argument, and Matt's got a good argument on net zero, or stopping net zero, they then say, don't you believe in the climate? And Matt then has to say, yes, he accepts the climate science, which is perpetuating net zero. There's no climate science that is the basis of the climate fraud, that is the basis of net zero. But by having to not deny the science, not deny what we're told is the science somewhere, it exists somewhere, I've never seen it, it's never been given to, and we'll talk more about that in future. But Barnaby Joyce and Matt spoke out against climate fraud, climate alarm many years ago, then they folded when they got into cabinet, and they're finding it very difficult to dig themselves out of it. Who started the destruction of our electricity grid and energy? John Howard, Liberal National Party Prime Minister. When you drive up energy prices, which have tripled since John Howard fiddled with the national electricity market, the renewable energy target, the stealing of private property rights, electricity prices since his government's destruction of our electricity sector have trebled. When energy costs increase, productivity dies. Competitiveness internationally dies. Standard of living dies. The country's future dies. Productivity. If you look at the single greatest impact that's taken the West and now China and increasingly India out of poverty and out of scratching around in the dirt for our living, as ever reducing energy costs. Coal, oil and natural gas, hydrocarbons, the wonder components. They are responsible for lifting mankind out of the mess, out of the swamp. And what did John Howard's government do? It reversed that decline and changed it to an increase. And since then we have increased our prices of electricity. Artificially, we have trebled them. So what would One Nation do? We would shut the Department of Climate Change and Energy and related departments, agencies, programs, schemes, regulations, rules, all the rest of it. I'll give you some more figures in a minute on that. We've conservatively estimated that at more than $30 billion a year. Saved. Money that's saved. By the way, Porsche and Mercedes are now saying they're bringing back V8s and they're throttling back on their construction of electric vehicles. We would also withdraw from the UN Paris Agreement. We're still waiting for the LNP and the Nats to say that. We would tax gas exports, currently being exported at virtually nothing, no revenue to the country. So that would earn $13 billion a year from some of the largest tax evaders in the world, Chevron included. By reducing electricity prices 20% immediately, simply by changing the terms of the national electricity market, we would save the government alone $3 billion in its electricity bill. That's not government money, that's taxpayer money. The other thing we must mention is that solar and wind are yet another example of killing the environment to save the planet. Solar and wind are not only raising the price of electricity dramatically and forcing us out of international competitiveness, they're killing the planet by the environmental destruction. And that leads to the next point, I want to touch on briefly, culture. Tony Abbott talked about it. We've been talking about it many times. I was so pleased to see voters walking up to me and saying, what about the culture, Malcolm? What about the culture? That's why we've been raising it. What's culture? Well, culture to me, I've done a lot of thinking about culture and a lot of work on culture over the years. Culture is essentially the actions, the behaviours of people, combined with their attitudes and their feelings towards their organisation, their country, their company, their footy club. The morals, the values, the legends, the myths, the leadership, what the leaders do. You know what I'm getting at. It's a glue within an organisation. It's the mortar that binds the building blocks. Companies have known, some smarter businesses have known for decades, that the most important single biggest driver of productivity, of quality, of safety, of environmental responsibility, of minimizing people turnover, of maximizing profit is corporate culture. Culture of the business side, culture of a footy club, culture of a church group. It's the most important factor there is in a profit and loss statement, and yet it's never measured. So it's the same with a country. It's the glue that holds everything together. Now, at a major mine, which led Australia, and in many cases led the world, that we designed and built early in the 90s, we hired best equipment. We hired the best people we could find. We designed the mine infrastructure. But the number one factor we worked on was designing the culture to get the behaviours and the low turnover of employees that really kept that mine afloat. The culture is the most important thing. The United Nations and the World Economic Forum are deliberately targeting cultural breakdown because that destroys social cohesion. It destroys individuals' sense of identity. That's what's going on. That's another reason for high, reckless immigration. I'm going to mention another item that's important, and that is child mutilation. Some people call it transgenderism. I call it child mutilation. Chemical castration. Chemical destruction of the brain. I want to compliment Bernard Lane's article entitled Lost in Transition in the Weekend Australian on the election day, the 3rd of May. Fantastic article. Best I've ever seen. I want to also compliment Alison Clayton, a researcher, for her article entitled What Went Wrong. I'm going to make posts about them once we can get access. We're trying to get access beyond the paywall to the Lost in Transition so we can share it with people. Look, let's mention tax. How much more have I got? Yes, I promised to tell you about dancing lessons, didn't I? Tax. Adam Crichton, Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs. He's great on COVID, productivity, questioning climate alarm, climate fraud. He published an article in The Australian entitled "We're Crying Out for Tax Reform, Not a Raid on Wealth Before It's Even Created." Superannuation fund accounts, and I've done a video on this, and I've posted it on social media. Superannuation fund accounts. For accounts over $3 million, the tax rate will be doubled from 15% to 30%. That will apply to unrealised capital gains. In other words, if your book figures show that you've had an increase in the value of an asset, you'll pay tax on it even though you haven't sold it. That will force some taxpayers to sell assets to pay for tax on income not earned. The threshold is, that's first of all, that's morally wrong. Secondly, that $3 million threshold is not indexed. So people who currently have funds well below $3 million in value will over the next decade or so exceed $3 million in value. The tax a 22-year-old today will pay, it is the tax that the 22-year-old today will eventually pay. So it'll be eventually a tax on everyone's super fund. Unrealised gains is a tax on money that you haven't even made yet. It's a tax on a book price that's increased, a value of an asset that increased, but you haven't sold it, so you haven't realised the profit. Anthony Albanese himself is exempt because he's an undefined benefit scheme and it doesn't apply to him. This is the same deal as bracket creep, which only one nation has opposed. Twice I've tried to introduce an amendment to tax laws to change that, to remove bracket creep and index it. Twice the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, the Nationals, and most independents have opposed it, and the Greens. And now they're basically extending the bracket creep from personal tax to superannuation tax. Here's the point. The government is currently 28% of the gross domestic product of Australia. 28%. We must get it under 20%. Only One Nation in lead up to the election identified expenditure savings to cut taxes. $90 billion plus in savings. We had the guts to say that. Adam Crichton, I'm going to quote from him. I've got some notes in front of me. Adam Crichton in his article says, "It's remarkable that while Australians' living standards have been plummeting, the share of workers' wages being siphoned off into accounts they can't touch until they retire has been steadily ratcheting up from 9.5% to 12% with barely a peep of criticism." And he goes on to say, quote, "There's no established policy in Australia with as many powerful backers as compulsory superannuation, including the union bosses, the union movement, which in effect controls industry funds and the funds management industry itself, which creams off tens of billions of dollars a year in fees. This was brought in to give union bosses a guaranteed income for the larger unions." And he says, "Numerous studies show the 12% rate is too high, leaving ordinary people with too high savings in their retirement and too little during their working years when they need the money to save for housing deposits and the ever-growing costs of raising a family." Spot on, Adam. And he goes on, if there's a cost of living crisis, why not allow workers at least the option to have some of their mandatory savings paid as ordinary income? Everyone would benefit except the super industry. Or, as One Nation policy says, let the super account invest in your own home. That's only in One Nation policy. Only One Nation will abolish bracket creep. We've tried twice. Only One Nation has policy on immediate tax reform. We put it to the election. Medium-term tax reform, and long-term tax reform. Listen to Adam Crichton's last word. 2010, the Labor government Henry tax system review. This is what he says. That review identified 125 different taxes levied across the three tiers of government in Australia, urging a massive simplification. Unfortunately, no government since has made any serious effort to do so. Australia is crying out for tax reform, not destructive tax experimentation. End of quote. And now I'm going to go on in the same breath, the fat bubble. This is from Ben Fordham's article, Ben Fordham's program. Thank you. We're going to put it up. This is from his program. It's only 4 minutes. It's brilliant. The Albanese Labor Ministry is now at a bloated 49 members, 49 ministers. The United States Cabinet comprises 15. And by the way, Ben didn't mention this, but they're each paid much less than an Australian cabinet minister. Ben Fordham says the United States has 13 times Australia's population. Yet Australia has 3 times the ministers, the cabinet ministers, that the United States has. He goes on to say, per person, Australia has 40 times more government ministers. 40 times more government ministers. Now you know why your bloody tax is so high. He goes on to say, Ben says, 2.5 million government employees. 1 in 5 Australian workers is employed by the government. That means each worker who's not employed by the government keeps 1/4 of a worker for the government. Every 4 workers keeps 1 full government worker in a job. The wages to bureaucrats in this country, $230 billion. One Nation has pledged to cut the Department of Climate Change, Energy and Environment. As I said a while ago, that'll save at least $30 billion per annum. That one department has got 3 ministers, 11 Commonwealth entities and companies, according to Ben, 38 government-appointed boards, 70 other government boards and structures, 8,800 bureaucrats. Worse, these are all under the control of Labor's faceless faction brokers, the faction bosses. Albanese doesn't have a say in who gets appointed as a minister. He might allocate them within the portfolios, but he doesn't get a say as to who actually becomes minister. The faceless bureaucrats, the faceless power brokers, in the factions control that. You think you elected a government. You elected a band of bastards who are wrecking this country. Now, dancing lessons. Before I wind up, it's 4 o'clock. Dancing lessons. As I said, I've got two left feet when it comes to dancing. I'm tone deaf, I think, but I actually enjoyed it last night. It was wonderful out getting some lessons with my wife, Christine, and I enjoyed it. And I actually think I was better than she was last night. She's a very, very good dancer, and very good on her feet, very light on her feet. But she stood on my toes more than I stood on hers. So anyway, it was good fun. So I intend to continue doing that. I was going to tell you a few more stories, but I won't. It's 4 o'clock. We've got time for one or two questions. I'll finish with a quote and then a couple of questions. Oh, what was that question? Why do we pay universities taxpayers money to bring in a ton of foreigners? Good question. Good question. We shouldn't be. And I'll tell you why the universities are charging fees and bringing in foreigners, because they have become dependent on the revenues. They have become dependent on the revenues from foreigners. That's why they did it. COVID nearly broke several universities, particularly the University of Queensland, not far from here. One more question. Unrealised gains, says Robbie, unrealised gains tax is already a part of Labor's budget without being passed by lower house, Sky News reported. I saw something about that too. So I'll have to check that. But yeah, sometimes you've got to be careful what you see on the internet. But I'll have to check that. Why is it our kids are paying exorbitant rents, yet banks deny mortgages? The Banker's magazine in America in the 1920s, I think. I've seen the quote. John McRae showed me the quote. I've seen the actual Banker's magazine. Say that the bankers want to prevent home ownership so that they can control people's whole livelihoods. And that's exactly what the UN's doing. This is not accidental consequence. It's a deliberate consequence of mass migration to smash culture, destroy individual identity as Australians, to smash home ownership, to make home ownership unaffordable. When people are dependent on government for their homes, when people are dependent on banks for their homes, you can control them. Will AMP bring in an inheritance tax? I suspect they will wait and then bring it in. But I don't know for sure, but I suspect that'll happen. There are people in the Labor Party who want it. The other thing to remember is that once it's come in, any of these new taxes, unrealised capital gains tax, superannuation tax doubling, once they come in, the LNP won't remove them. So I was going to talk about being very pro-human. I'll have to wait for another day to talk about that. Most people know that I am. Let me finish with a quote. I recently read it from the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7. Love is ever ready to believe the best of every person. Love is ever ready to believe the best of every person. Humans are wonderful. So we can turn this ship around, get behind one nation. We hope we have more senators. Let's look forward to restoring our country. Have a good weekend.